welcome everyone to this week's Art Talk Live. So happy that you could join us. My name is So-Young Lee, and I'm the Landon and Lavinia Clay Chief Curator here at the Harvard Art Museums, and I will serve as today's moderator for today's program. As we begin today's talk, the Harvard Art Museums acknowledge that Harvard University is situated on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Massachusetts people, and we strive to honor this relationship. Art Talks Live, as those of you who've joined us before know, offer an up-close look at works from our collection with our team of curators, conservators, fellows, and graduate students. And this semester, our online series is inspired by Reframe, a museum-wide initiative that aims to reimagine the role and future of the University Art Museum. And these short interactive talks will examine difficult histories, foreground untold stories, and experiment with new approaches to the collections of Harvard Art Museums, reflecting the concerns of our world today. The Reframe initiative seeks to inspire, challenge, and engage our museum community by thinking critically about which artists, which groups of people, and which cultures are seen or not seen. We are delighted to have you joining this ongoing conversation. Now, before we get started, I want to share just a few logistics about today's talk, some of which you'll see on the screen. We're using the webinar format in Zoom, so you'll notice that your microphones are muted and your videos are off. And we invite you to submit brief questions for our presenter via the Q&A box, which you will find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The presentation will last approximately 15 minutes, and we'll dedicate the final 10 minutes or so to Q&A. But you please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A box at any point during the program, and I will do my best to get to many, if not all of them. Today's talk, as all of our Art Talk Lives are, is also being recorded, and the video will be posted on our website in the coming weeks. We will aim to conclude the talk at or close to 1 o'clock. And now I am very pleased to introduce my colleague, Lynette Roth, Daimler Curator of the Busch Reisinger Museum, Division of Modern and Contemporary Art, who also, as some of you will know, used to serve as the moderator for our Art Talks Live. Lynette will give us an up-close look at a large-scale painting by the German artist Corinne Wassmuth. So with that, I will turn it over to Lynette.
Great, thank you so much, So-Young. It's really fun to be on this side of things on our Art Talks Live. And my talk today, as So-Young mentioned, is called Corinne Wassmuth and German Painting. In 2016, the Busch Reisinger Museum received a major gift, a large-scale painting by Berlin-based artist Corinne Wassmuth. On 3 adjoined panels, nearly 8 feet of plywood support, 50 U-Heinrich-Heine-Straße of 2009, depicts a busy intersection of building facades, vehicles, and pedestrians, vegetation, sidewalks, and shop windows. The speed limit and subway signs at Upper Center lend the work its name and situated on a major thoroughfare in Berlin Mitte, near the site of the artist's former studio. When it initially arrived, I saw the painting as a quintessentially German one for the new millennium, a meditation on the country's bustling capital in the digital age. And it wasn't until Wassmuth visited the museum in 2018 as our annual Busch Reisinger Museum lecturer that I began to see the painting in a new light, as an artwork that might also help me think through the very question of what defines the collection of the Busch Reisinger Museum, a museum founded in 1903 as the Germanic Museum and largely dedicated to the art of German-speaking countries. And since that time, now over a year now, we've been exploring those questions also on our Instagram handle @Busch Hall. which we see as a virtual forum to explore questions of art and national identity, transnationalism, and our shared global future. And I hope to interest many of you to join in that conversation as well. In what follows, I will examine this German painting by a German artist to ask the question, how does Wasmuth's work relate to what seems to be our stubborn definition of German art? And more broadly, has the art of the nation state run its course? Born in Dortmund in 1964, Corinne Wasmuth was raised in South America, primarily in Argentina. Her father was an engineer whose work for an Austrian and then a Swiss company took the family to Chimbote, Peru, and then to Buenos Aires. In 1983, at age 19, Wasmuth decided to return to Germany for the opportunities it could afford and began her studies at the Dusseldorf Art Academy. Wasmuth arrived at the unmistakable West German epicenter of art after 1960. While the Dusseldorf scene had several inflection points, notably the legacy of Joseph Beuys and the painting of Gerhard Richter, who was also a professor at the Academy, it was also at that moment in the thrall of the so-called Neo-Expressionism, also known as the Neue Wilde, or New Wild Ones, which included artists A.R. Pank, Georg Baselitz, Markus Lüpertz, and Jörg Immendorf. And we can see several of them here in photographs by Benjamin Katz. In 1984, the year after Wasmuth arrived, curator Caspar Koenig and colleagues organized the large exhibition Von hier aus, as seen from here, 2 months of new German painting in Dusseldorf. Wasmuth and her friends snuck into the opening. There, she would have seen dominating the large hall of the Dusseldorf Trade Fair, a massive painting by Pank titled Quo Vadis Germania, Where Are You Going, Germany? It epitomizes the sense that this generation of German painters, as art historian and curator Siegfried Gohr argued at the time, had been spurred on by the, quote, German dilemma, namely the country's fascist past and its current division. Museums and collectors were also avidly acquiring this work, also in the United States. And here we see the German collector couple, Peter and Irina Ludwig, with a number of the artists. This widespread reception in many ways sealed how contemporary German painting was and remains understood. Work, according to art historian Christian Weikop, that, quote, regenerates certain aspects of expressionism and often maintained a shared interest in deconstructing German identity, end quote. The international marketing strategy and commercial success of this German painting is a well-known story, one since elevated to the status of art historical myth. And here I'll let Wasmuth describe it in her own words. And this is a clip taken from Corinne's incredible lecture at the Harvard Art Museums in 2018, which you can see also on our Vimeo site. And Marvin is going to put that into the chat for you now. Thank you, Marvin. So here is Corinne.
On the other side, there was in Germany paintings called Neue Wilde Malerei. This was very bad painting, full of stains and blots and brush strokes and drippings and kneading with painting. And the painting was material to knead and thick. And they painted the guys painted the paintings and put it on the wall like trophies, and me the same. Oh, wow, I'm so great. And I had to feel I got to a dead end road because it's always the same, and then I have to make a break.
So here, the bad painting Wasmuth refers to is, of course, not her own subjective evaluation of the work, but the notion embraced by some proponents that their work need not ascribe to traditional standards of quality or skill. So generally speaking, bad painting is figurative and with broad, rough facture. Wasmuth refers here notably to the work's practitioners as the guys, and the early 1980 exhibitions of the Neue Wilde were indeed predominantly male, and the very physicality of such gestural painting itself was associated with maleness. Wasmuth credits collage with her break from the dead end of painting like the guys. Fire, which we saw in the clip, is the first painting in her official inventory and the last that she made while still a student at the academy. The surface is smooth and the imagery based on photographs by the artist of flames and burning embers. Painted in distinct sections inspired by mosaic tiles, the painting's effect is crystalline, kaleidoscopic. Of fire, she has said, there was no center. Wasmuth has since continued to base her compositions on existing imagery. In 2001, she began to do this work digitally, combining images culled from the internet with her own photographs, a digital archive that now numbers more than 900,000 images. Quote, before any new painting, she has said, I prepare a wide-ranging and specifically researched archive of images. This imagery is for Wasmuth a collective subconscious, her motifs belonging to, quote, our collective global everyday life. Around the time she began to work with digital imagery, Wasmuth's paintings also expanded drastically in size, measuring anywhere from 8 to 18 feet long. And we can see our painting here on view at the Harvard Art Museums in 2018. Now, a central perspective is confounded not only by the motif's perceptual distortions, but also by the work's sheer scale. It is difficult to take it all in, to find one's footing. We are, of course, also reminded of the extreme size of Panck's Quo Vadis Germania, or much of the work of Anselm Kiefer and Gerhard Richter. The key difference, however, and the aspect of Wasmuth's work that has received the most attention is her so-called Lasurmalerei. That's her slow and meticulous technique of applying thin layers of paint. So imagine old masterly technique of painting. Panck painted Quo Vadis Germania in 2 days. Wasmuth can work up to a year on a single large-scale work such as this one. Much of the writing on her practice has focused on this aspect, contrasting her painting style slowly with Max Stirner's The Materials of the Artist at her side with the speed and proliferation of digital imagery. The act of painting in such a way is seen as playfully anachronistic in response to the proliferation of images in our everyday lives. Unlike that of her Neue Wilde predecessors, Wasmuth's slow practice also resists quick market turnover. Wasmuth's surfaces have been referred to as slick, and she has referred to herself in opposition to the gestural expression of the Neue Wilde as Antiklecks, anti-blob. According to curator Christina Vey, Wasmuth's arduous glazed painting technique, quote, appears as completely depersonalized as the surface of a photograph. This is admittedly a tempting analogy, not least of all because Wasmuth's subjects derive from photographs, albeit often digital images that have no analog surface at all. But close examination reveals that the surface, at least of the more recent paintings, recent paintings, is far from slick. Even Vey seems hesitant in her description, putting the term depersonalized in scare quotes, and thereby underscoring the problematic and annoyingly stubborn association between gestural painting and subjectivity. So what if we examined Wasmuth as more than a rejectionist or anti-blob stance of the 1980s male painting bravado, still so closely associated with German art? What if hers is not a depersonalization in response to that purported personalization, but rather indicative of new ways of deconstructing German identity. In 2002, Wasmuth won a competition to create work for the newly constructed German Federal Chancellery. For the building's so-called Sky Lobby, she made 2 paintings on canvas. One, seen here, was of the Madrid airport. The other featured the Dusseldorf train station. The modern glass-filled architecture of the Chancellery reminded Wasmuth of the structures she was already always drawn to: transitory and impersonal public space, specifically designed to keep people on the move, to prevent them from getting too comfortable. Into these transit spaces, she collaged in images of the rumpled bedsheets of friends, effectively bringing the public and private space of the people into the government building said to represent them. Like the architecture itself, the taillights of cars in Wasmuth's paintings suggest that everyone move along. And here we see the very representational function that these paintings have served ever since. Streets, sidewalks, airports, and plazas are the frequent stuff of Wasmuth's paintings. But the subject in 50 U Heinrich-Heine-Straße is not just any busy intersection in Berlin-Mitte. Leading along Heinrich-Heine-Straße and its continuation Brückenstraße to Berlin-Alexanderplatz, the street was a former border crossing between the Russian and US sectors. The U-Bahn station itself, a so-called ghost stop for West Germans. On the main corner stands a large East German prefab building known as a Plattenbau. There is a history to the place that has since been layered over, a collage of a different sort. Wasmuth collected an archive of imagery of the street that would inform 2 related paintings. In her photos, her interest was clearly piqued by the long expanse of the street, now the frequent site of demonstrations, marathons, cycling races, and all other manner of large-scale gathering, and the obligatory police presence at such events. The artist's first painting based on this archive is Brückenstraße from 2008. Here, Wasmuth combined her Berlin photographs with images of the pedestrian shopping street in Bonn. Bonn was not incidentally the post-war seat of the German capital until the 1990s, long lending the provincial city an international flair. Public space, especially in the urban environment or in spaces of transit, is where all segments of the population necessarily come together. Brückenstraße is exemplary, in We's words, of Wasmuth's depictions of a, quote, heterogeneous and multicultural society, either rushing along on their way somewhere or waiting for a connection or demonstrating. Brückenstraße is dominated by the bright, vivid colors, red and blue and yellow, of the protest. It was because of this color palette that Wasmuth, as she is known to do, returned to her image archive and painted another painting. The result was 50 U Heinrich-Heine-Straße, in which the artist's limited color palette dissolves points of contrast, adding a new cohesion across the surface. Between the 2 works, not only our point of view shifts, but the specific places do as well. Here, the shopping zone in Bonn has been replaced on the right-hand side by the consumerist mecca of New York City's Fifth Avenue. Here, too, people are caught in the constant flow of foot traffic, the pace no doubt faster than in Bonn. Sometimes place is only hinted at. At center left, in 50 U Heinrich-Heine-Straße, stands a man wearing an Argentine soccer jersey, because, says Wasmuth, quote, I always try to paint the flag. With few exceptions, Wasmuth's biography typically notes her birth in Dortmund in 1964, followed by her time at the Art Academy, making hers, at first glance, a seamless German biography. And yet the artist herself has said, quote, I was born in Germany, I am German, but I feel more South American. Just as the painting refutes a single place, the painter's identity denies essentialization. In both paintings, figures float, faceless, across spatial and temporal divides. Neither Wasmuth nor her work can be situated like the name of that 1984 exhibition as von hier aus, as seen from here. She and we are here, but also there. One might say that rather than the physical, subjective embodiment of the Neue Wilde, Wasmuth seeks to disembody. And yet this is where the oppositional rejectionist narrative, personalized versus depersonalized, thick versus thin paint application, fast versus slow, male versus female, really begins to fail us. Just as our attempts to define ourselves by a nation state ultimately fail us as well. In doing so, we resign our bodies, ourselves, to the nameless, faceless mass, to the whims of global techno-capitalism. And where are we in all of that? Wasmuth's Berlin gallerist Johann König markets his artists with art-inspired objects called souvenirs, the name a reference to a tourist trinket. The gallery's location in Berlin-Kreuzberg, like its art venues, now a popular travel destination. In Wasmuth's case, high-res images from an untitled painting from 2017 were digitally printed on a pair of silk pajamas, a limited edition retailing at 1,500 euros. The look debuted at Berlin Fashion Week, worn by the then 14-year-old hip-hop dance sensation, Leonie Oziana. And just like that, the empty space, the non-place of the painting was re-embodied. And yet not just in any body, but a specific Gen Z one, the body of a girl from Bremerhaven who grew up listening to the international phenomenon of hip-hop born out of 1970s American Black street culture. Pajamas, like bed sheets in the imagery at the Federal Chancellery, are deeply personal. In 2020, during the first pandemic summer, Wasmuth showed her painting DJ-ZV1 Titanium Dioxide at Sprühtmagers in Berlin in an exhibition entitled Local Talent. Curated by fellow artist Thomas Demand, it was a show of artists residing in Berlin, in part necessitated by the lockdown itself. Wasmuth's motif is an airport waiting room. The title refers to the color, titanium white, that dominates it, empty areas of primed panel. Airports epitomize the non-place. Just because I spent hours at the Reykjavik airport doesn't mean that I've been to Iceland. And I also have to think of that Tom Hanks movie, the one in which the protagonist, unrecognized by any country, is forced to live in an airport while his home country is ravaged by war. Airports and refugee camps are where the nationless, stateless go to wait in limbo. The coronavirus pandemic changed more than our airports. When those essentially shut down, like our national borders, we were thrown back on the local, and whether we liked it or not, on the nation state. During that time, Wasmuth continued to paint imagery of transitory spaces, bodies hovering above moving walkways, empty spaces everywhere. Delayed by the pandemic, this most recent work is still waiting for its New York debut, scheduled now for this September. The blurred lines of Wasmuth's paintings, the very transnationalism, the interconnectedness that they chronicle, demand we consider ourselves in that in-between, between the national and the global. In the wake of Brexit, the rise in the US and elsewhere of nationalist political rhetoric, and right now, in the midst of war on the European continent, where are we in all of that? Thank you.
Thank you so very much, Lynette, for that tightly focused, incredibly thought-provoking and really exciting talk. And even through the screen that we can experience with you, the tactile, the live quality of this painting. I think our listeners today or participants are a little bit shy, so I'm going to prod you. If you have questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. But I thought maybe we could start, Lynette, with if you could give us a little bit more detail, context on her painting technique. You alluded to it, given that she works from this incredible, I think you said something like 9,000 right now, just archive of images. So she works from the digital, and yet her technique is slow, and that sometimes her work can take a year to complete. So if you could walk us through that process and give us a little bit more insight on that sort of dichotomy between what appears and the actual.
Sure, and it is so important to Corinne Wassmuth, really how she approaches the painting of her work. So I'm showing here again. This is actually 50 U Heinrich Heine Straße in Corinne's studio in Berlin in progress, and you can see already, the need for a ladder for her to actually complete the work. But basically, she takes that digital archive, which is, almost, a million images, I'm sure, at this point, and collages them on the computer and then projects them onto the support, and then begins slowly creating her imagery out of that. And actually a lot of that then happens in the process of painting. So when you see our painting up close, you can actually see the colored pencil lines that she uses to first outline figures and all of these other architectural spaces. And then she really paints kind of background to foreground. So really also often from light to dark, and has actually described that as in some ways painting her paintings like 6 times, because she kind of keeps going over them and keeps going over them. And she had said at some point that that's really frustrating, but of course that's also what makes, which lends the work this very unique quality and the precision in the technique. She's really, thinking about it as old masterly, and has often described it as, the paintings will last forever, right? So there's a kind of, this is not this kind of slapdash, I'm going to kind of, dump my paint on the canvas, but that in some ways, the longevity of the painting itself, it creates this incredible tension between what seems like fleeting moments, right, which are captured through photography, and then become this kind of static moment. And I actually very consciously use the word chronicle, because I think, although she's capturing these brief fleeting moments, we've seen that she's layering, from all of these different places, and she's also layering on the canvas. But then the idea is that this is something that's literally built to last.
Those words that you've just used, chronicling layers, so apt to not only her process, but the intent and the message in her works. I love that. Question in the Q&A box. I'd love to hear her thoughts on the themes of transience and mobility in her work, and how that relates to her choice of two-dimensional media. It's a good question, actually, right? Calling attention to that, the painting as opposed to anything else she could have done, and the role of scale and boundaries of the frame.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it's true. If you imagine, I think that's really why that's been a focus of a lot of the writing about Wassmuth's work, is that it does seem like it's counterintuitive, right? I sort of referred to it as, well, why would you kind of use these anachronistic techniques, right? If actually what you're going for is kind of pointing to transience, or how, as I'm arguing, really, we are so interconnected, right, in our world today, in ways that, I think are important to acknowledge as coming out of concerns of a German painting, as a like painting anywhere else. I think it's a conscious choice. I mean, she is a painter, right? So she did a lot of work in collage that actually inspired, especially the early paintings, that she would literally collage the paper itself before her turn to digital imagery. And so I do think, that is the medium that she's working in, but that decision to sort of move, I think, also to an even larger scale and an even more elaborate painting process, to my mind, is really in some ways kind of doubling down on the longevity, the monumentality, right? Things that we actually associate with traditions of painting, anathema to, how we take photographs or get our imagery today. So I think that's, I think that's what really makes her work so unique and so exciting, and also makes us so very, very lucky to have a painting by Corinne Wassmuth at the Harvard Art Museums, because as you can imagine, there are actually not that many.
That's right. That's right. A question about negative space. Could you talk a bit more about her use of negative space as white? And you'll love this. It reminds me of Annelies Hage's use of cameraless photography, inverting light and dark. Annelies Hage being the artist about whom Lynette has curated an exhibition that is currently live in our galleries.
Yes, and that artist referred to her technique as white shadows. And actually, I mean, what we see in so much of Corinne's work is that space, but also that particularly the human face really is, absent, right? So it's not that she's not painting out the faces, she's just not painting them in. And that also has a basis in protection of people's privacy, right? So she's thinking very much about, if she takes a photograph of someone on the street, not wanting to include their features in the painting for all eternity. In fact, in paintings prior to ours, she often painted her sister or her brother's face in instead. And then in ours, we really start to get really just the lack of that. And it's in some ways, it's also that dissolve. Let's see if I can find a detail where you really don't know what is figure and what is ground. Here in some of these, right? It sort of just starts to disappear. That I actually, I was playing with the idea of embodiment, right? In the layers of paint, but also obviously in the surface itself. So we can't we get actually that physical movement. She loves also the fold of cloth and how when people move and their bodies are actually in action, what that does actually. So here, to the kind of sculptural presence of their body, and at the same time, that juts right up against that total flatness. So I think it's a great analogy even to cameraless photography, but also to kind of the decisions an artist makes in, how to use their support, right? How to kind of think about what is absent and what is present. And I think in Corinne's work, that's, all very, very conscious.
Thank you, Lynette. I hope you'll have a chance to see some of the comments where, calling out the lightness and the color, particularly this work, which you had explained as well, almost fanciful, but kind of juxtaposing with the message itself, which is actually quite deep and serious in some ways. That notion of blending of cultures and comment. I think, this resonance of multiple identities or culture specificity that then also lends to universal identity. And I have to say personally, it completely resonates with me, somebody who grew up as a diplomat's child traveling all around, and I've now been in the United States longer than I can remember, but I definitely identify with Corinne's sense of, I'm here, yet, my part of me is there. We have now, I think, reached the time, but if you could just say briefly about, does she therefore then bring in actual concrete elements of her South American childhood or identity in her works? Because it's not here in this particular work, right?
Right here we get just, that very subtle sort of striped shirt, right? Which of course I didn't recognize as the flag until she pointed it out to me when she was here a number of years ago. And there is a series she did where she actually goes back to some of the areas where she grew up and combines that imagery with, again, other images from airports and train stations and many of her other cityscapes. And so there was a moment where she was really, thinking about the specificity of that setting as well. And I think, in thinking about that and then also thinking about Berlin, right? Berlin itself as, a place where people are coming now, from all over the world. And coming together, not just in the art scene, but even, right now as, an influx of refugees from the Ukraine in Berlin, right? So Berlin as also I think, not surprising place for her to have landed as an artist, but also as one who's so interested in these issues.
Thank you again so very much, Lynette. I mean, the time just flies when you're having fun and having these wonderful discussions. Very inspiring. And thank you all for joining us and for your excellent questions. And I invite you all to please visit us in person. We have a number of provocative and thoughtful interventions and changes throughout our permanent galleries, in part reflecting our Reframe ongoing work, and an exciting roster of this spring special exhibitions, including prints from the Brandywine, and as I mentioned earlier, a show curated by Lynette, White Shadows, Annalise Hager, and the Cameraless Photograph. And I also would like to note that while we are absolutely thrilled to welcome you all in person again, we are continuing to host some programs virtually, especially the series of Art Talk Live. And next one is in 2 weeks on Tuesday, the 17th at 12:30. So I hope you will join us for that. And finally, before I release you, when you leave the session, you will receive a link to a short online survey. And we would be most grateful for your feedback on our program and hope that you'll have a moment to share your thoughts with us. Thank you again, and I wish you a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, So Young. Bye, everyone.
Bye.